You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. What if I told you that the men who seem the least reactive and the hardest to read are almost always the ones who end up respected, desired, and in control of their lives? Not because they manipulate, not because they suppress emotion, but because they've mastered something most people never even attempt: emotional detachment. Think about it. The more you care, the more anxious you feel. The more you chase, the more people pull away. The more you try to prove your value, the less others seem to see it. Yet there's always that one man who stays composed when things get uncertain. He doesn't beg for attention. He doesn't explain himself. He doesn't panic when silence appears. And somehow, things bend in his favor. This isn't luck. It's discipline. It's Stoic control. And once you understand it, you'll never approach relationships, conflict, or ambition the same way again. In this video, you're going to learn why emotional detachment isn't coldness, it's power. Why letting go is often the fastest way to gain leverage, and how men who regulate their inner world always win in the outer one. Watch this till the very end. The final insight ties everything together, and missing it means missing the entire point. Number 1, they control their reactions instead of chasing outcomes. Emotionally detached men don't win because they're cold, distant, or uninterested. They win because they've learned a lesson most people never truly absorb. You don't control outcomes, you only control yourself. And the moment you stop confusing effort with obsession, discipline with desperation, something inside you stabilizes. You stop leaking energy. You stop reacting blindly. You stop handing your power to circumstances, people, and results that were never yours to command in the first place. As Epictetus put it with brutal clarity, some things are up to us and some things are not. That single distinction, once lived rather than merely understood, separates the grounded from the restless. When you chase outcomes, you become dependent on them. Your mood rises and falls with results. Your confidence becomes conditional. You start performing for rewards rather than acting from principle. Stoicism calls this a trap of externals. The emotionally detached man steps out of that trap. He doesn't disengage from life. He engages correctly. He puts his attention where it actually belongs, on his responses, his conduct, his inner order. That shift alone makes him calmer, sharper, and far harder to shake. You can feel the difference immediately when you begin practicing this. Instead of rushing mentally toward what will happen, you anchor yourself in how will I respond. The first question breeds anxiety. The second builds strength. Reminded himself daily, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. This isn't poetic comfort, it's operational wisdom. When you internalize it, your nervous system relaxes. You stop trying to force life to cooperate. You start cooperating with reality. Emotionally detached men don't suppress emotions, they regulate them. There's a difference and it matters. Suppression creates pressure. Regulation creates clarity. When you stop reacting impulsively, you create a pause between stimulus and response. In that pause lives choice. And choice is where dignity is forged. Most people never access that space. They're too busy chasing outcomes: approval, attention, reassurance, certainty. You step ahead the moment you stop needing those things to feel steady. This detachment changes how you move through challenges. You no longer treat every situation as a verdict on your worth. You stop personalizing uncertainty. You stop bargaining with fate. Instead, you adopt a quiet confidence rooted in preparation and restraint. Seneca warned, "He suffers more than necessary who suffers before it is necessary." Outcome chasing is pre-suffering. Reaction control is freedom. Here, where the winning actually happens, though it's rarely visible in the moment. When you're not attached to outcomes, your actions become cleaner. You speak without tension. You decide without urgency. You walk away without resentment, People feel this immediately, not because you demand respect, but because you don't beg for resolution. Emotional self-control signals abundance. Chasing outcomes signals scarcity. You don't need to announce this. It shows itself in how little you're rattled. To practice this, start with a simple daily discipline, outcome fasting. For one interaction a day, consciously release the need for a specific result, not mentally, verbally. Say to yourself, my job is my conduct, not the conclusion. Then focus entirely on staying composed, present, and deliberate. Notice how your body responds when you remove expectation. Notice the calm that replaces tension. This is training, not theory. Another exercise is reaction rehearsal. Each morning, remind yourself that friction will appear. Disagreement will arise, delays will happen. Resistance is guaranteed. Prepared himself this way. Today I shall meet with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, not to become bitter, but to remain unshaken. When you anticipate difficulty without dramatizing it, you stop being surprised by it. Surprises steal composure. Preparation preserves it. As you practice controlling reactions instead of chasing outcomes, you'll notice something else. You become harder to manipulate. When outcomes no longer dictate your emotional state, pressure loses its leverage. Urgency stops working on you. Provocation falls flat. You're no longer pulled into emotional contracts you never agreed to. This isn't detachment from people, it's detachment from emotional dependency. Over time, your identity shifts. You stop seeing yourself as someone who must get things to feel okay. You become someone who is okay regardless of what happens. That internal stability is rare, and rarity is power. Seneca wrote, "The wise man is neither raised up by prosperity nor cast down by adversity." That steadiness is not passive. It's earned through repetition, reflection, and restraint. End each day with a brief Stoic audit. Ask yourself where you reacted instead of responded, where you chased a result instead of maintaining your standard. Don't criticize yourself, just note it. Awareness sharpens faster than shame ever could. Then choose one moment tomorrow where you'll do better. That's how detachment is built, incrementally, intentionally, quietly. Eventually, you'll realize the paradox. By letting go of outcomes, you perform better. By controlling reactions, you influence more. By refusing to chase, you become someone others orient toward. Not because you're detached from life, but because you're anchored within yourself. And that is why emotionally detached men always win. Not loudly, not immediately, but consistently, internally, and on their own terms. Number 2, they detach from validation and approval. Detaching from validation and approval is one of the most misunderstood strengths a man can develop. People hear the word detached and imagine coldness, distance, or emotional absence. That's not what this is. This is about freedom. This is about no longer handing your self-worth to opinions that change by the hour. When you stop looking outward for permission to feel solid inside, something stabilizes in you. You stand differently. You speak differently. You move through the world without that subtle hunger that others can sense, even when you try to hide it. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus said, "If you want to be invincible, make yourself independent of the opinions of others." Read that slowly. Independence from approval is not arrogance, it's sovereignty. The need for validation keeps you reactive. You begin adjusting your tone, your beliefs, even your values just to stay liked, accepted, or admired. And every adjustment chips away at self-respect. You might not notice it immediately, but your nervous system does. It knows when you're bending instead of standing. When you detach from validation, you stop outsourcing your identity. You no longer wake up wondering how you'll be perceived today. You wake up anchored in who you already decided to be. That shift is subtle but profound. It removes desperation from your actions. You're no longer trying to extract reassurance from the world. You're bringing your own stability into it. Reminded himself, "I do my duty, other things trouble me not." That line captures the essence of emotional detachment. You focus on what's yours, your effort, your conduct, your discipline, and release the rest. Approval seeking is exhausting because it never ends. There is always another standard, another expectation, another set of eyes judging whether you're enough. When you finally see this clearly, detachment stops feeling like loss and starts feeling like relief. You realize you've been running on a treadmill that leads nowhere. Stepping off doesn't make you fall behind. It gives you back your energy. This is why emotionally detached men appear calm under pressure. They are not calm because they feel nothing. They're calm because they're not constantly checking the emotional temperature of the room to decide how they should feel about themselves. Seneca wrote, "He who depends on himself for happiness is the strongest." Validation is dependency. Detachment is strength. The moment you stop needing approval, your emotional reactions soften. You do spike when praised or collapse when ignored. You remain level. And that levelness is magnetic. Not because you're trying to attract anything, but because stability always draws attention. People trust what doesn't wobble. They respect what doesn't beg. You don't need to announce this detachment. In fact, the more silent it is, the more powerful it becomes. You let others have their opinions without letting those opinions enter your bloodstream. There's a discipline required here. Detaching from validation doesn't happen by accident. You have to practice noticing when you're reaching outward for reassurance. That reach can be subtle, a glance, a pause, a second guessing of your words. When you notice it, don't attack yourself. Just pause, breathe. Remind yourself of a Stoic truth. I control my choices, not their reactions. That reminder interrupts the old pattern. One practical exercise you can start immediately is this. Begin acting without checking for response. Say what needs to be said clearly, then stop. Do what you decided to do, then move on. No mental replay, no scanning for approval. This will feel uncomfortable at first. That discomfort is withdrawal from validation. Stay with it. Each time you resist the urge to seek reassurance, you strengthen emotional independence. Another practice is internal affirmation. Not motivational slogans, but quiet acknowledgement. At the end of the day, reflect on whether you acted in alignment with your values. That's it. Not whether you were liked, not whether you were praised. The Stoics believed virtue was its own reward. Wrote, "The reward of a good deed is having done it." Let that idea rewire you. When you internalize it, approval loses its grip. Detachment from validation also sharpens your boundaries. When you don't need acceptance, you stop tolerating disrespect disguised as opinion. You don't argue. You don't explain excessively. You simply don't engage where your self-respect would be compromised. This isn't withdrawal from connection. It's selectivity. And selectivity is confidence expressed quietly. You may notice that as you detach, some people react. That's normal. When you stop feeding expectations, those who benefited from your need for approval may feel unsettled. Stoicism teaches you to accept this without resentment. Epictetus warned, "If you wish to improve, be content to be thought foolish." Detachment often looks strange to those still addicted to approval. Let it. Your task is not to be understood, it's to be steady. Over time, something powerful happens internally. You stop performing. You start inhabiting yourself fully. Your words slow down. Your emotions become less dramatic, more precise. You feel less urgency to prove anything. And that lack of urgency is exactly what makes you formidable. You are no longer easy to manipulate because praise and criticism no longer move you like levers. Make this a daily discipline. Catch yourself when you feel the impulse to seek reassurance. Replace it with a Stoic question. Did I act according to my principles? If the answer is yes, rest. If the answer is no, adjust tomorrow. That's it. Simple, grounded, sustainable. Detaching from validation doesn't make you less human. It makes you more whole. You still feel. You still care. But you no longer bargain with your dignity for acceptance. You carry your worth internally where no one can take it from you. And when you do that consistently, you don't chase outcomes. You don't chase approval. You don't chase anyone's permission to be who you are. That's why emotionally detached men always seem to win. Not because they dominate others, but because they've mastered themselves. Number 3, they remain calm under emotional pressure. They remain calm under emotional pressure because they've trained themselves to value clarity over chaos. And that one choice changes everything. When pressure rises, most people tighten, rush, react, defend. You don't. You slow down, you breathe, you stay present. That calm isn't accidental, it's practiced. The Stoics understood this deeply. Reminded himself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Emotional pressure is not the enemy. Losing command of yourself is. When you stay calm, you keep the one thing that actually matters: control over your inner state. You already know what emotional pressure feels like. It's that internal surge, the heat in the chest, the urge to respond immediately, to explain, to justify, to push back. Stoicism teaches you to pause right there, not to suppress emotion, but to govern it. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means feelings don't own you. And when emotions stop owning you, your decisions become clean, intentional, and unshakable. That's why emotionally detached men always seem one step ahead. They're not wasting energy fighting their own impulses. Epictetus put it plainly, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Most people hear that quote and nod. Very few live it. Living it means recognizing that pressure is a test, not a threat. It's asking you one question: can you remain yourself when the environment tries to pull you off center? Each time you do, your self-respect deepens. You start trusting yourself under stress. And self-trust is a quiet form of power. When you remain calm, something subtle happens. You stop chasing outcomes. You stop trying to force control where it doesn't exist. Seneca warned, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Emotional pressure feeds on imagination, on assumptions, projections, and fears that haven't even happened. Detachment cuts that feed. You return to what's real, what's in your control, what requires action, and what requires restraint. This calm isn't passive, it's disciplined. It's the result of repeatedly choosing restraint over release. When pressure rises, instead of expressing everything you feel, you let it settle. You allow silence to do its work. Silence under pressure isn't weakness, it's filtration. It prevents you from leaking authority through unnecessary reactions. And every time you hold that line, your nervous system learns a new pattern. I am safe even when I don't react. That lesson alone reshapes how you move through the world. To build this, you need daily practice, not theory. One simple exercise is emotional labeling. When pressure appears, name it internally: anger, anxiety, impatience. Numbing creates distance. Distance creates choice. Choice restores power. Another practice is deliberate delay. Commit to not responding immediately when emotions spike. Even a few breaths can interrupt old reflexes. Seneca called delay the greatest remedy for disturbance. He was right. There's also a deeper layer to this calm. Emotionally detached men don't tie their identity to outcomes. When your sense of self depends on how things go, pressure becomes unbearable. But when your identity is rooted in character, pressure loses its grip. Framed it perfectly. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. Notice what he doesn't mention: approval, validation, victory, just integrity. That's the anchor. Remaining calm under emotional pressure also rewires how others experience you, even if you never say a word. Calm has gravity. It signals self-command. It communicates that you don't need to scramble for control because you already possess it internally. But the real win isn't external, it's internal. You stop feeling hijacked by moods. You stop regretting reactions. You stop replaying moments wishing you handled them differently. Peace becomes your default instead of something you chase. Another practical exercise is end-of-day review, a habit practiced relentlessly. Ask yourself where pressure showed up and how you responded. No judgment, just observation. Awareness sharpens discipline. Discipline creates detachment. Detachment creates calm. This chain compounds over time. Small daily wins stack into a radically different inner posture. Emotional pressure will never disappear. Stoicism never promised comfort, it promised strength. The goal isn't to avoid pressure, but to become someone who remains intact inside it. When you do that, you stop leaking energy into panic, overthinking, or impulsive action. You conserve it, and conserved energy becomes presence. Presence becomes authority. Make this your standard. I do not abandon myself under pressure. Repeat it, live it, train it. When emotions surge, you stay. You don't flee into reaction. You don't drown in expression. You observe. You choose. That choice, repeated enough times, turns calm into your natural state. And that's why emotionally detached men always win. Not because they dominate others, but because they've mastered themselves. Number 4, they walk away without explaining or negotiating self-respect. Walking away without explaining or negotiating your self-respect is one of the clearest signs of emotional detachment and one of the hardest habits to build. Most people are conditioned to justify themselves, to clarify, to persuade, to bargain for understanding. But Stoicism cuts through that impulse with a sharper truth. Your dignity does not require approval, explanation, or agreement. The moment you feel the urge to negotiate your worth, you've already stepped off solid ground. As reminded himself, be content to seem what you really are. Not to argue for it, not to prove it, just to be it. When you decide to walk away cleanly, without speeches or negotiations, something inside you shifts. You stop trying to control how you're perceived. You stop managing reactions. You stop rehearsing arguments that only exist to soothe insecurity. This is emotional detachment, not coldness, but clarity. You understand that self-respect is not something you can explain into existence. It's something you demonstrate through action. And sometimes the most powerful action is leaving quietly. The Stoics were relentless about this point. Epictetus said, "If anyone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, do not make excuses about what is said of you, but answer. He was ignorant of my other faults, else he would not have mentioned these alone." That line carries an entire philosophy. No defense, no negotiation, no emotional labor spent trying to correct an external narrative. You remain intact by refusing to enter a frame where your worth is up for debate. You already know how draining it feels to explain yourself to someone who has already decided how they see you. Your words don't land, your tone tightens, your calm slips, and the more you try, the less grounded you feel. Stoicism teaches you to recognize this moment as a boundary, not a failure, not a misunderstanding, a boundary, and boundaries don't need speeches, they need enforcement. Emotionally detached men win not because they dominate, but because they don't abandon themselves. They don't linger where respect has been compromised. They don't stay to negotiate terms that should never be negotiated in the first place. Seneca warned, "He who is brave is free." Freedom here is internal. It's the freedom from needing closure, validation, or the last word. When you can walk away without explaining, you're free from dependence on external confirmation. This doesn't mean you become avoidant or passive. It means you're precise. You know when engagement serves your values and when it erodes them. You stop confusing patience with self-betrayal. You stop mistaking endurance for strength. Emotional detachment is the ability to remain centered even when you choose to disengage, especially then. Notice how often the need to explain is really the need to be understood, and how often the need to be understood is really the fear of being misjudged. Stoicism asks you to let that fear pass through without obeying it. You don't correct every misunderstanding. You don't rescue your image. You don't chase alignment. You allow reality to be what it is and you choose your response. As wrote, You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Walking away without negotiation is an act of trust. You trust that your character does not need a defense attorney. You trust that your values don't require consensus. And you trust yourself enough to endure the temporary discomfort of silence. That discomfort is where growth happens. That's where emotional detachment is forged, not in detachment from life, but in detachment from compulsive reactions. Here's a practical exercise you can begin immediately. The next time you feel disrespected or internally compromised, resist the urge to explain. Don't rehearse a justification in your head. Don't soften your boundary with qualifiers. Simply disengage mentally first. Take 3 slow breaths. Let the impulse to speak rise and fall without acting on it. This trains your nervous system to tolerate non-action, and tolerance is power. Another practice is to redefine what winning means. Winning is not convincing someone. Winning is not being agreed with. Winning is leaving a situation with your inner order intact. At the end of the day, reflect quietly. Did I preserve my self-respect today without needing to announce it? That question reshapes your standards. You begin to measure success internally where it belongs. Stoicism never promised comfort, it promised clarity. And clarity often asks you to do less, not more, to speak less, to explain less, to justify nothing. Epictetus again, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Once you know who you are, explanations become optional. Negotiations become unnecessary. You move differently because you are anchored differently. Over time, this habit compounds. You stop lingering in spaces that demand self-betrayal as the price of admission. You stop teaching people how to treat you with words and start teaching them with presence or absence. And absence, when chosen deliberately, is not weakness. It is alignment. Make this a discipline, not a reaction. Decide in advance that your self-respect is non-negotiable. Decide that you won't argue for basic dignity. Decide that silence is sometimes the most honest response. This isn't emotional shutdown, it's emotional sovereignty. When you walk away without explaining, you send a message to yourself first. I am enough without permission. That message settles into your posture, your voice, your decisions. You become steadier, less reactive, more selective. And that steadiness is felt long before it is understood. This is why emotionally detached men always win, not because they escape pain, but because they refuse to trade their inner order for external reassurance. They don't negotiate their self-respect. They protect it, quietly, consistently. And that is a victory no one can take from you. Number 5, they let actions speak louder than emotional arguments. They let actions speak louder than emotional arguments because they understand something most people never slow down enough to see. Words soaked in emotion rarely change outcomes, but disciplined behavior reshapes reality. When you argue emotionally, you're trying to control perception. When you act calmly and consistently, you're controlling direction. Stoicism has always favored the second path. Reminded himself, waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. That line isn't poetic advice, it's a strategy. You don't announce strength, you demonstrate it. And the moment you stop explaining yourself, your self-respect begins to solidify. You already know how tempting it is to defend, justify, and clarify every feeling. The mind tells you that if you just say the right words, things will finally align. But Stoicism teaches the opposite. Excess explanation is often a sign of inner instability. Emotional arguments leak energy. They invite chaos into your inner world. And once your emotions take center stage, you've lost leverage, not over others, but over yourself. Epictetus was blunt about this. If you want to be invincible, make sure that no one can provoke you. Emotional arguments are provocation with your consent. When you rely on action instead of emotional persuasion, something powerful happens inside you. You stop outsourcing your sense of worth to reactions, agreement, or validation. You no longer need others to understand your feelings for you to feel grounded. That's emotional detachment, not coldness, but clarity. Detachment means your inner state is not dragged around by every disagreement or misunderstanding. You still feel, but you don't hemorrhage energy trying to be heard. You act quietly, repeatedly, effectively. Stoicism never taught suppression. It taught mastery. Seneca warned, "He who is brave is free." Emotional arguments are often chains disguised as honesty. You speak because you feel compelled, not because it's useful. The detached man pauses. He asks himself whether words will improve the situation or merely discharge tension. Most of the time, silence paired with decisive action does far more than emotional speeches ever could. And deep down, you already know this. You felt the emptiness after arguing. You felt the calm after simply doing what needed to be done. This is why emotionally detached men win. Not because they dominate others, but because they don't sabotage themselves. When you stop arguing emotionally, your actions become cleaner, more intentional, less reactive. You begin to move through life with a quiet authority that doesn't need explanation. People respond to patterns, not promises. To consistency, not emotional intensity. Put it perfectly. The tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say, or think, or do, only what you do. Let this shift start internally. The next time you feel the urge to explain how you feel, pause and ask, what action would make this explanation unnecessary? That question alone can change your habits. Instead of talking about discipline, you practice it. Instead of defending your standards, you live by them. Instead of demanding understanding, you become predictable in your values. Predictability in character creates trust. Emotional arguments erode it. There's a deeper layer here that's easy to miss. Emotional arguments often arise from a fear of loss of control, respect, or connection. Stoicism teaches you to confront that fear directly. Epictetus said, "Don't seek for everything to happen as you wish, but wish for things to happen as they do." When you accept that you can't force outcomes through emotion, you stop fighting reality. And when you stop fighting reality, your actions become aligned instead of desperate. To train this, adopt a simple daily practice. For 1 week, reduce emotional explanations by half. Not expression, explanation. Feel what you feel, but don't rush to narrate it. Replace commentary with conduct. Let your decisions, routines, and boundaries communicate for you. Notice how your nervous system settles when you're no longer trying to convince anyone of anything. That calm is not emptiness. It's strength consolidating. Another exercise. Write down moments when you feel compelled to argue emotionally. Don't analyze them deeply. Just record them. Patterns will emerge. You'll see how often the urge to argue comes from fatigue, ego, or the need for reassurance. Awareness breaks the cycle. The Stoics believed self-observation was the foundation of self-mastery. Practice this daily, reminding himself that external noise has no power unless you grant it access. Over time, this approach changes how you carry yourself. Your posture shifts. Your timing improves. You become selective with words. And paradoxically, when you do speak, people listen more. Not because you're louder, but because you've proven that your words are backed by behavior. Silence plus action creates gravity. Emotional arguments create friction. This doesn't make you distant from life. It makes you present without being entangled. You still care, but you care with discipline. You choose actions that align with your values instead of chasing emotional relief. Seneca captured this restraint when he wrote, "A man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." Emotional arguments often make you suffer twice, once in the moment and again afterward. Choosing action over emotional argument is choosing self-respect over momentary release. It's telling yourself, "I don't need to spill my inner world to prove my worth." That belief, repeated through practice, hardens into quiet confidence. And quiet confidence doesn't announce itself. It moves, it builds, it compounds. End each day with a simple reflection. Ask yourself where you acted instead of argued, where you held your ground without explanation, where you chose calm execution over emotional persuasion. Those moments, however small, are wins, not over others, but over the old version of you that needed to be heard to feel whole. This is why emotionally detached men always seem to win. They stopped fighting with words and started shaping outcomes with behavior. They let actions speak, not because they have nothing to say, but because they understand the rare power of saying less and doing more. Number 6, they don't fear loss, so they're never desperate. They don't fear loss, so they're never desperate, and that single truth quietly explains why emotionally detached men always seem to come out ahead. Detachment here isn't coldness or indifference. It's not shutting down or avoiding feeling. It's freedom. It's the absence of panic when things shift. It's the calm that comes from knowing that nothing external gets to decide your worth, your stability, or your direction. When you stop fearing loss, you stop chasing. And when you stop chasing, everything about the way you move through the world changes. Most desperation isn't loud, it's subtle. It shows up as urgency, overthinking, tension, the need to secure outcomes immediately. And all of it comes from the same place, the belief that losing something will diminish you. The Stoics dismantled this belief at its root. Epictetus was blunt. If you want to be invincible, make no treaty with things that are not in your control. Loss only terrifies you when you've made something external part of your identity. When your sense of self is tied to outcomes, you will always feel on edge. Detachment cuts that cord. When you no longer fear loss, your nervous system relaxes. Your mind clears. You're not scanning for threats or clinging to certainty. You're present, and presence is power. You're able to pause instead of react, to wait instead of force, to observe instead of chase. Desperation evaporates because there's nothing you're trying to grasp. You're grounded in the one thing that can't be taken, your character. Reminded himself daily, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. That strength shows itself in how you respond to uncertainty. Instead of rushing to secure guarantees, you allow space. Instead of demanding reassurance, you offer calm. Instead of tightening your grip, you loosen it. This isn't passivity, it's confidence without anxiety. Notice how fear of loss compresses you. It speeds you up. It makes your thoughts repetitive and narrow. Detachment does the opposite. It slows you down. It widens your perception. You start making decisions from clarity instead of urgency. And clarity is magnetic. People feel it. Situations respond to it. You're no longer trying to extract value from the moment, you're bringing stability into it. Stoicism never promised comfort, it promised resilience. Seneca wrote, "He who fears death will never do anything worthy of a man who is alive." Replace death with loss, rejection, or uncertainty, and the message stays the same. Fear makes you small, acceptance makes you formidable. When you've already accepted the possibility of loss, it loses its power to threaten you. You don't need to brace yourself, you're already steady. This is why emotionally detached men don't negotiate from weakness. They're not bargaining with reality. They don't need to control outcomes to feel safe. That inner security changes how you speak, how you decide, how you walk away when necessary. There's no rush, no pleading. No hidden agenda, just choice. Here's a habit you can start practicing immediately. Rehearse loss mentally. Not in a pessimistic way, but in a grounding one. Quietly remind yourself, even if this doesn't work out, I remain intact. This is classic Stoic negative visualization, not to induce fear, but to dissolve it. When you face loss in your mind, you strip it of its emotional charge. You stop running from shadows. Another exercise is voluntary restraint. Delay responses, delay decisions, Delay gratification, not as punishment but as training. Each time you choose patience over impulse, you're teaching your mind that urgency is optional. Desperation feeds on immediacy. Detachment thrives on space. Space gives you leverage over yourself. Emotionally detached men also don't confuse desire with necessity. They can want without needing. They can value without clinging. This distinction is everything. As Seneca observed, to be everywhere is to be nowhere. When your mind is scattered by fear of losing something, you're nowhere. When it's anchored internally, you're fully present wherever you are. You'll notice that as detachment grows, your reactions soften, not because you care less, but because you're no longer enslaved by outcomes. You don't interpret uncertainty as danger. You don't read distance as rejection. You don't chase clarity at the expense of dignity. You wait. And waiting when it's calm is a statement of strength. Make this a daily reflection. Ask yourself where fear of loss influenced your behavior. Where did you rush? Where did you overextend? Where did you compromise your inner balance to avoid uncertainty? Don't criticize yourself. Just observe. Awareness is the beginning of detachment. Each moment you notice fear without obeying it, you weaken its grip. The paradox is this: the less you fear loss, the more capable you become of gaining what actually matters: respect, stability, influence, and peace. Not because you're trying to win, but because you're no longer playing from scarcity. Captured it perfectly. It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live. Living fully requires the courage to let go. When you stop fearing loss, desperation has nowhere to root itself. You become selective, intentional, calm. You move from choice, not compulsion. And that inner posture changes everything, not because you force outcomes, but because you're no longer controlled by the fear of losing them. This is the quiet edge emotionally detached men carry. Not indifference, not coldness, but inner independence. Cultivate it daily. Practice it deliberately. And you'll find that the moment you no longer fear loss is the moment you stop losing yourself. Number 7. They observe patterns instead of reacting to feelings. Emotionally detached men don't win because they feel less. They win because they see more. While others get pulled into the current of every emotion that rises, excitement, irritation, hope, disappointment, you learn to step back and notice the pattern beneath the noise. That single shift changes everything. Stoicism never asked you to become cold or numb. It asked you to become clear. As reminded himself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. When you stop reacting to feelings and start observing patterns, you stop being controlled by the moment and start directing your life. Most men are ruled by immediacy. What they feel right now decides what they say, how they act, what they tolerate, and what they chase. The Stoic path asks you to slow that process down. Instead of asking, "How do I feel?" you begin asking, "What is actually happening here?" repeatedly. Emotions are temporary. Patterns are truthful. Feelings lie often, especially when ego or fear is involved. Patterns don't. When you train yourself to watch instead of rush, you begin to notice cycles, signals, rhythms. And once you see them, you're no longer surprised by outcomes that used to catch you off guard. This is where emotional detachment becomes power, not distance. You're still present, you still care, but you're no longer fused with every internal reaction. Epictetus said it cleanly: "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them." Observation strips opinions down to facts. You start noticing how situations unfold over time, how words and actions align or don't, how energy rises and falls. Instead of being yanked forward by emotion, you lean back and let understanding form. When you react emotionally, you collapse time. Everything feels urgent. You want resolution now. You want reassurance now. You want control now. Observation stretches time. It creates space between stimulus and response. And in that space, your self-respect grows. You don't jump, you don't chase. You don't explain yourself unnecessarily. You let patterns reveal intent, consistency, and direction. That patience alone sets you apart. There's a quiet confidence that comes from this. Not the loud kind that needs attention, but the grounded kind that comes from knowing you're not guessing anymore. You're watching, you're learning, you're adjusting deliberately. Seneca warned, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Emotional reactions live in imagination, stories you tell yourself in the heat of the moment. Patterns live in reality. When you choose patterns, you choose truth over drama. This way of operating requires discipline, and that's where most men give up. It's easier to react than to observe. Reacting feels active. Observing feels passive, until you realize it gives you leverage. When you observe, you're not trying to force outcomes. You're aligning your actions with what you consistently see. You stop investing energy where it evaporates. You stop arguing with reality. You conserve your emotional currency and spend it intentionally. Here's a practical habit to build this skill. When you feel a strong emotional surge, positive or negative, do nothing immediately. Nothing. Let the feeling rise, peak, and fall without action. While it passes, mentally label what's happening as data. Not good, not bad, just information. Over time, you'll notice that feelings repeat, but the underlying structure stays the same. That's the pattern revealing itself. Another exercise, shift your inner language. Replace I feel with I notice. This simple change rewires your attention. I notice tension. I notice anticipation. I notice resistance. You're no longer inside the emotion, you're watching it. This is Stoic detachment in practice. Calm, precise, grounded. As this becomes natural, your behavior changes without effort. You respond later, not faster. You move when clarity arrives, not when emotion demands it. You stop mistaking intensity for importance. And people feel this shift, even if they can't explain it. You're harder to manipulate because you're not predictable. You're steadier under pressure because you're not reactive. You're respected because you don't beg moments to go your way. Emotionally detached men don't win because they suppress their inner world. They win because they master it. They understand that feelings are weather, not direction. Patterns are direction. And once you start living by what repeats instead of what spikes, your decisions become cleaner, your boundaries firmer, and your presence unmistakably solid. Make this your daily practice. Observe before you engage. Pause before you respond. Track what repeats. Let time do its revealing work. This isn't about being distant from life, it's about being impossible to shake. And when you reach that state, you don't need to force outcomes. They align naturally with the man you've become. Number 8, they invest attention selectively, not impulsively. They invest attention selectively, not impulsively. And that single habit quietly separates men who drift from men who command their inner world. Attention is not free. It is not neutral. Wherever you place it, energy follows. The Stoics understood this long before dopamine loops and endless distractions existed. Your attention is your life in miniature. Waste it and you leak power. Guard it and you accumulate strength. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care deliberately. You choose where your mind rests instead of letting every stimulus pull you by the collar. Most people give attention the way they breathe, unconsciously. They react to tone, to approval, to rejection, to noise. But you're not meant to live like a reflex. Reminded himself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Attention is the steering wheel of that power. When you invest it impulsively, you hand control to whatever provokes you. When you invest it selectively, you become unshakable, not cold, not distant, but centered. You felt this difference before, even if you didn't label it. The moment you stop chasing stimulation, something steadies inside you. Emotional detachment begins there, not in withdrawal, but in discipline. You stop reacting to every emotional tug because you finally understand the cost. Every impulsive investment of attention fragments you. Every deliberate one consolidates you. Self-respect grows quietly in that consolidation. Epictetus was blunt about this. If you want to be invincible, make sure that no one can provoke you by anything outside your will. Provocation only works when your attention is available on demand. Emotional detachment teaches you to close that door, not permanently, intentionally. You decide what deserves your inner response and what does not, and that decision becomes a form of authority you carry into every interaction. This habit reshapes how you move through the world. You stop scanning for emotional highs. You stop rushing to respond. You stop feeding what drains you. Instead, you slow your internal tempo. Calm replaces urgency. Clarity replaces noise. And that calm is not accidental, it's cultivated. You're no longer ruled by impulse. You're guided by choice. Here's the truth most people resist. Attention is addictive. The mind craves stimulation the way the body craves sugar. Stoicism doesn't ask you to suppress that craving. It asks you to observe it. Seneca warned, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." Wasted attention is wasted life. Emotional detachment is simply the refusal to waste what is precious. You build this skill through practice, not force. Start by noticing where your attention goes automatically, not with judgment, just awareness. Observe the internal pull to engage, to react, to chase resolution. That pull is impulse. An impulse feels urgent, but it is rarely important. The moment you see it clearly, you create space. In that space, you choose. A powerful exercise is attention fasting. For set periods, you consciously refrain from investing attention in anything that triggers emotional spikes. Not avoidance, restraint. You let thoughts rise and fall without feeding them. You don't wrestle them. You don't follow them. You let them pass like weather. This trains the mind to decouple stimulation from response. Over time, your emotional baseline stabilizes. You feel less reactive, more grounded. That's emotional detachment in action. Another practice is intentional focus. Each day, choose a narrow target for your attention, something aligned with growth, discipline, or clarity. When distractions appear, gently redirect, not aggressively, calmly. This isn't about control through tension. It's about leadership through consistency. Wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. Thoughts follow attention. Improve one and the other follows." As you refine this habit, you'll notice a subtle shift in how you're perceived. You speak less, but with weight. You react slower, but with precision. You don't chase emotional momentum, you set the pace. This is why emotionally detached men seem to win without effort. They're not expending energy everywhere. They're investing it where it compounds. Detachment also protects your dignity. When your attention is selective, you stop needing immediate resolution. You become comfortable with silence, with uncertainty, with unfinished emotional loops. That comfort signals inner security. You no longer rush to prove, explain, or defend. You let time and consistency speak. Seneca captured this restraint perfectly. "He who is brave is free." Freedom begins when your attention is no longer hijacked. Make this a nightly reflection. Ask yourself where your attention went and why. Did it serve your values or your impulses? Did it strengthen your composure or dilute it? This isn't self-criticism. It's self-draining. Each reflection sharpens awareness. Each day becomes a rehearsal for mastery. Over time, emotional detachment stops feeling like a strategy and starts feeling like your natural state. You're still present, still engaged, but no longer entangled. You choose when to lean in and when to step back. You don't confuse urgency with importance. You don't confuse emotion with truth. This is the quiet advantage. While others scatter their attention, you gather yours. While others react, you respond. While others burn energy proving themselves, you conserve it building yourself. And in that conservation, something powerful forms: self-respect that doesn't need applause and control that doesn't announce itself. Invest your attention like a Stoic, slowly, selectively, with purpose, because the man who controls his attention controls his direction, and the man who controls his direction always ends up ahead without ever needing to chase. Number 9, they stay grounded in purpose, not people. They stay grounded in purpose, not people, and that single shift changes everything about how you move through the world. When your center of gravity is internal, when your sense of direction comes from what you're building rather than who is reacting to you, your energy stabilizes. You stop swaying with approval or disapproval. You stop chasing emotional weather. You stand where you are. The Stoics understood this deeply, reminded himself, "Do not be tossed about, but keep to your own course." That line isn't poetic decoration. It's instruction. When your purpose is clear, people no longer pull you off axis. Most emotional suffering doesn't come from events. It comes from attachment. Attachment to outcomes. Attachment to being liked. Attachment to how others respond. Emotional detachment in the Stoic sense is not coldness, it's clarity. It's deciding that your mission matters more than momentary reactions. When you anchor yourself in purpose, you stop outsourcing your emotional state. And the moment you stop outsourcing your inner stability, you gain leverage, not over others, but over yourself. You felt the difference between moving with intention and moving for approval. When your focus drifts toward people, your mind becomes noisy. You analyze, you anticipate, you adjust yourself in subtle ways, trying to maintain connection or avoid loss. That constant drains you. Seneca warned, "He who is everywhere is nowhere." The same applies emotionally. When you're everywhere tracking moods, signals, responses, you're nowhere grounded. Purpose simplifies you. It strips away the unnecessary mental traffic. Staying grounded in purpose means you wake up knowing what deserves your energy and what doesn't. Not because it feels good in the moment, but because it aligns with who you are becoming. That orientation changes how you respond to tension. Instead of asking, "What will this person think?" you ask, "Does this serve my direction?" That question alone sharpens your self-respect. You stop reacting from fear of loss and start acting from commitment to growth. Epictetus put it bluntly, "If you want to be invincible, make yourself independent of those things you cannot control." People are not yours to control. Their moods shift, their opinions mutate, their desires change. If your emotional balance depends on them, you will always be unstable. Purpose, on the other hand, is yours. It's an internal contract. When you live by it, you no longer negotiate your identity moment by moment. This is why emotionally detached men appear calm under pressure. They are not scanning faces for reassurance. They are not trying to manage impressions. Their attention is directed inward and forward, and that presence is felt. Not because they dominate conversations or withdraw dramatically, but because they are not needy for emotional confirmation. Neediness repels, direction attracts. The Stoics never said this in modern language, but the principle is the same. Detachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care selectively. You invest deeply in what is aligned and let go quickly of what isn't. Wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Staying grounded in purpose is the daily practice of that realization. You don't allow external reactions to dictate internal standards. There's a quiet confidence that emerges when you live this way. You stop explaining yourself. You stop justifying your choices, not out of arrogance but out of clarity. You know where you're headed, and when you know that, detours lose their appeal. Emotional detachment is simply the refusal to be distracted by what doesn't matter in the long run. Here's a practice you can begin immediately. Every time you feel emotionally pulled, whether toward validation, reassurance, or reaction, pause and ask yourself, "What am I building right now?" not metaphorically. Literally, character, discipline, direction. If the emotional impulse doesn't serve that construction, let it pass. Don't suppress it. Observe it. The Stoics believed observation weakens impulse. Awareness dissolves urgency. Another exercise is intentional narrowing. At the start of each day, define one internal aim that has nothing to do with people. Not outcomes, not reactions, just conduct, patience, focus, restraint. Then measure your day against that, not against how others responded to you. This rewires your reward system. You stop seeking emotional highs and start valuing internal consistency. Seneca captured this shift perfectly. A man is as unhappy as he has convinced himself he is. When your metric changes, so does your emotional climate. Over time, grounding yourself in purpose makes you less reactive and more deliberate. You don't rush to respond. You don't chase closure. You don't feel compelled to fix emotional turbulence that isn't yours. That restraint is often mistaken for indifference, but it's the opposite. It's respect for yourself first. And self-respect is magnetic. This way of living also sharpens your boundaries. When your purpose is non-negotiable, you don't overextend. You don't linger where your energy erodes. You don't argue with what is misaligned. You simply step back and return to your path. Epictetus advised, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Purpose is that first declaration. Everything else becomes secondary. The more you practice this, the less emotional turbulence controls you. You become steady, predictable in your values, not in your reactions. And that steadiness is what people often interpret as strength. Not loud strength, not aggressive strength, quiet strength. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. Make this a reflection habit. At the end of the day, ask yourself where you abandoned purpose to manage emotion. Notice it without judgment. Then ask where you chose direction over reaction. Reinforce that choice mentally. Stoicism is built on repetition. You become what you practice, not what you understand. Staying grounded in purpose, not people, is not about withdrawal from life. It's about engagement without dependence. You still feel, you still connect, but you don't lose yourself in the process. You remain rooted, and when a man is rooted, nothing external can easily shake him. That's why emotionally detached men always seem to win. Not because they manipulate outcomes, but because they refuse to be ruled by what they don't control. They choose the long game. They choose inner order over emotional chaos. And every day they do that, they become harder to disturb and easier to respect. Number 10, they accept outcomes without resentment or revenge. They accept outcomes without resentment or revenge, and that single habit quietly separates emotionally detached men from everyone else. Not because they don't feel disappointment, loss, or frustration. They do, but they refuse to let those feelings hijack their identity. The Stoics understood this deeply. Wrote, choose not to be harmed and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed and you haven't been. That line isn't denial, it's discipline. It's the recognition that the event itself is neutral, and the suffering comes from the story you attach to it. When you stop feeding that story with resentment, you reclaim your power. Resentment is seductive. It disguises itself as justice. Revenge pretends to be strength, but both are chains. They keep you emotionally tied to an outcome that has already passed. The detached man understands something most people resist. The past cannot be corrected, but your response to it can be refined. You don't win by replaying what should have happened. You win by deciding what kind of man you remain afterward. Epictetus was blunt about this. It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them. Sit with that for a moment. If your peace depends on how outcomes unfold, then you're not in control, you're at the mercy of chance, people, and circumstances. Emotional detachment is not coldness, it's sovereignty. It's the decision to anchor your self-worth in character, not results. When something doesn't go your way, the instinct to resent is automatic. The body tightens. The mind looks for someone to blame. The ego demands compensation. But every time you indulge that reflex, you reinforce dependence. You're saying, I need this to have gone differently in order to be okay. The Stoic path asks you to say the opposite. I am okay because I govern myself, regardless of outcome. Seneca warned, anger, if not restrained, is frequently more hurtful to us than the injury that provokes it. Resentment is just anger stretched over time. It corrodes quietly. It drains energy that could be used to build, refine, and advance. Detached men don't waste that energy. They redirect it inward, not to suppress emotion, but to process it cleanly, without theatrics, without fantasies of revenge, without emotional debt. Revenge feels tempting because it promises relief, but notice how fleeting that promise is. Even the Stoics knew that retaliation never restores balance, it multiplies disturbance. Reminded himself, the best way of avenging yourself is not to become like the wrongdoer. When you chase revenge, you let someone else dictate your behavior. When you let go, you decide who you are. Acceptance is not resignation. It's not passivity, it's clarity. Acceptance means you acknowledge reality without resistance. You stop arguing with what already is. That mental shift alone creates distance between you and the emotional surge. From that distance, you regain choice. You can act or not act without poison in your veins. Here's a habit you can practice immediately. When an outcome disappoints you, pause and name it internally as final. Not hopeless, not permanent, just final. This moment is done. No appeals, no rewrites. That single word closes the loop. It stops the mind from reopening the wound again and again. You'll feel resistance at first, that's normal. Stay with it. This is how detachment is trained. Another Stoic exercise is voluntary reframing. Instead of asking, why did this happen to me? Ask, how does this test my character? That question shifts your focus from loss to agency. Stoicism was never about avoiding hardship. It was about using it as a forge. Seneca wrote, fire tests gold, suffering tests brave men. The outcome didn't break you. It revealed where your discipline still needs sharpening. Emotionally detached men also understand impermanence. Nothing owed them anything. Not outcomes, not people, not recognition. When you expect less from externals, you resent less when they fall away. This doesn't make life smaller, it makes it cleaner. You move forward unburdened. You stop dragging emotional luggage behind you. There's a quiet confidence that comes from knowing you don't need payback to feel whole. You don't need apologies to regain balance. You don't need closure from the outside world. Your closure comes from alignment with your values. That's why detached men appear calm under pressure. They've already decided that no outcome has the authority to pull them out of character. Try this daily reflection before sleep. Replay the day and identify where you felt the urge to resent or retaliate. Don't justify it. Don't condemn it. Just observe. Then ask yourself one question. Did this reaction move me closer to the man I want to be or further away? Over time, this practice rewires your instincts. You start choosing dignity by default. Detachment also sharpens patience. When you're not ruled by resentment, you don't rush to act. You wait, and waiting, when done consciously, becomes leverage. Wrote, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. The obstacle doesn't demand revenge, it demands growth. This is why emotionally detached men always seem to win, even when they lose on the surface. They walk away intact. They conserve their energy. They remain focused. While others spiral, they stabilize. While others react, they refine. And over time, that compound advantage becomes unmistakable. Make it a rule for yourself. No resentment, no revenge, only reflection, and every outcome becomes information, not insult. training, not trauma. This doesn't happen overnight, but every time you choose acceptance over bitterness, you strengthen the muscle that keeps you unshaken. You don't win by getting even. You win by staying whole. And once you experience that level of inner control, you'll never willingly give it up again. Before you close this video, remember this: you have power over your mind, not outside events. That wasn't written for motivation. It was written as a warning. Understood something most men never learn. The moment your emotions control your actions, you hand your leverage away. Emotionally detached men don't win because they're cold. They win because they're anchored. They don't chase validation. They don't argue for attention. They don't react just to be seen. They choose when to speak, when to walk away, and when to stay silent. And that calm, that restraint creates gravity. People feel it. They respect it. They move toward it. If you take only one thing from this video, let it be this: stop letting outcomes decide your self-worth. Detach from the need to be liked. Detach from the urge to explain yourself. Detach from the fear of losing someone who only values you when you're trying to keep them. When you do that, you don't become distant, you become unshakable. This is the Stoic edge: quiet, controlled, unbothered, and incredibly powerful. If this resonated with you, don't let it fade. Apply it. Live it. And if you want more Stoic lessons on emotional mastery, attraction, and inner strength, subscribe and stay with this channel, because the man who masters himself never loses.